The desert stretched endlessly, a sea of gold and ochre, where the sun scorched the earth with an unrelenting hand. The wind, dry and sharp, carried grains of sand that whispered against the stone walls of the village like tiny fingers scratching at memories. It was here, in this unforgiving place, that Ayanna lived, a young woman whose eyes reflected both the vastness of the desert and the depth of her quiet suffering. For as long as she could remember, the villagers had spoken in hushed tones behind her back. She had married a man chosen by her family, a union meant to bring honor and continuity. But the months stretched into years, and Ayanna remained childless. In the village's eyes, that made her a failure, a mark of misfortune. The elders muttered of curses, whispered that the desert itself had rejected her, and the other women avoided her, fearful that her supposed infertility might taint them too. Ayanna had grown accustomed to the stares, the pointed fingers, and the subtle coldness that made even the familiar streets feel hostile. She walked with her head lowered, yet her heart burned with quiet indignation, a fire the villagers could not see. Every laugh behind her back, every whispered curse, pressed against her chest like the heat of the noonday sun, heavy and suffocating. She loved the desert, but even its beauty felt like a prison when every grain of sand seemed to echo the judgment of those around her. The elders, old and rigid as the stones beneath their feet, had called a council that morning. Their decision was as ancient as the desert's wind, a tradition meant to cleanse the village of what they deemed weakness or failure. Ayanna was summoned to the center of the dusty square, the heart of the village where the sun struck hardest and shadows offered no refuge. She stood barefoot, the hot sand burning through the thin solace of her shoes, her arms trembling slightly. Around her, the villagers formed a circle, their faces set and unyielding, like cliffs carved by time. "No child has come to you, Ayanna," the eldest said, his voice like dry earth cracking. "And so the desert demands its answer. You shall be buried, so that the sands may take what the earth has rejected." Ayanna's heart thudded violently in her chest, a wild drum against the silence of the crowd. Fear surged, fierce and raw, but it was joined by something else, something she had tried to bury along with hope: anger. Anger at a world that measured a woman's worth by her womb, at traditions that demanded her suffering, at the eyes that would not see her pain. Yet even as her pulse raced, her body felt rooted in place, the desert's heat pressing her into the sand beneath her feet. The villagers began the cruel task. Hands that once touched her with neighborly familiarity now forced her down, digging, shoving, until the sand swallowed her legs and torso, leaving only her neck and head exposed. The sun blazed overhead, relentless. The wind whispered, but it brought no comfort, only the stinging of sand against her cheeks and hair. Her breath came fast and shallow, each inhale a reminder of the vulnerability of her situation. She could feel the cool breeze above, the open sky that seemed to mock her, reminding her of the freedom that had been denied. And yet, amid the terror, Ayanna's spirit refused to break entirely. She lifted her chin, daring the elders and the villagers to meet her gaze. The heat, the judgment, the isolation, it was all there, heavy as stone, but so is a quiet defiance, a flame that the desert sun could not scorch. The wind carried the faint scent of sage and dust, and she closed her eyes for a moment, imagining the desert beyond the village, where the horizon stretched unbroken, where she might run, might breathe, might be free, even buried, even surrounded by cruelty. Ayanna held on to that small, stubborn ember of hope. The desert was harsh, but it had taught her endurance. And deep within, she sensed that this was not the end of her story. The sun climbed higher, turning the sand into a blistering sea of gold. Ayanna's body was half buried, the coarse grains pressing against her skin like 1,000 tiny hands. She could feel the weight of the desert pressing down upon her, not just the sand, but the collective gaze of the village, their judgment, their disappointment, their cruelty. Each second stretched into an eternity, a slow, scorching torment. She tried to shift, to find comfort, but the sand held her fast, trapping her limbs beneath its oppressive heat. The wind blew with sharp intensity, whipping grains against her cheeks, her eyes, and her lips. The taste of sand mixed with the bitterness of fear filled her mouth. Every sound seemed amplified, the caw of a distant crow, the low murmur of the villagers, the faint scrape of sandals against stone, and yet there was a deafening silence in her heart. She was alone, utterly exposed, and the world around her seemed indifferent to her suffering. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet. The shame the villagers imposed upon her was unbearable, yet somewhere deep inside she nurtured a stubborn ember of defiance. She imagined the desert as more than a cruel cage. It was a witness, a silent observer of her endurance. Every breath she drew through the scorching heat felt like a small rebellion, a refusal to be fully claimed by their judgment. The elders circled her, their faces harsh under the sun, shadows falling like jagged scars across the sand. Their words were few, but heavy. "The earth will decide your fate," the eldest intoned, voice dry and final. "If the desert rejects you, the tribe is cleansed." With each syllable, Ayanna felt the cold grip of their ancient customs tighten. She was a symbol, a warning, an object of fear rather than a human being with dreams, pain, and resilience. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time itself seemed to warp under the blazing sun. Her muscles ached from holding still, her back stiffened against the crushing weight of sand, and her throat burned with thirst. Every now and then, a villager approached to sprinkle a little water across her face, a gesture that felt more like mockery than mercy. Her skin glistened with sweat, grains of sand sticking stubbornly to her arms and neck, making every movement a tiny agony. Ayanna's mind drifted to memories of softer days, her mother teaching her to read the clouds, her father laughing as they raced across the dunes, the scent of wildflowers hidden among the desert stones. Those memories were bittersweet, reminders of warmth now replaced with judgment. She clenched her fists against the sand, holding on to them as if they were lifelines. Even buried, she refused to vanish into the earth like the villagers wished. The desert, for all its harshness, seemed to respond to her spirit. A small gust of wind lifted grains from her face, brushing against her cheeks like a whisper of comfort. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the air shimmered with heat and promise. Though her body was trapped, her mind wandered, imagining freedom, imagining a world beyond the rigid walls of cruelty. And then there was a sudden shift, a faint ripple of sound above the relentless drone of the desert. A shadow fell across her face, momentarily cooling her heated skin. She blinked against the brightness, straining to see. Could it be? A glimmer of hope flickered in her chest, fragile but undeniable. Even in the heart of punishment, even in the midst of humiliation and fear, Ayanna felt a quiet certainty. She was not alone. Somewhere in the vast desert, beyond the circle of judgment and oppression, a force stirred, a promise that not all eyes turned toward her were filled with condemnation. And though she did not yet understand who or what it might be, she felt the first tremors of hope breaking through the suffocating heat and weight of the sand. The desert's heat shimmered like liquid gold, warping the horizon into waves of mirage. Ayanna's body remained trapped, half buried in the scorching sand, but now her mind had begun to wander beyond fear, clinging to the faint whisper of possibility. It was then she noticed something strange, a distant figure moving across the dunes, steady and purposeful, like a hawk gliding above the desert winds. Her heart skipped a beat. The villagers had gone about their cruel task with certainty, but this figure seemed different. A presence that did not belong to their circle of judgment. The silhouette drew closer, revealing broad shoulders and a quiet strength that seemed to command the desert itself. He was clad in weathered clothing, the colors blending with the earth, and carried a long staff more for balance than for combat, his movements deliberate, unhurried, but every step exuded purpose. Ayana's breath caught in her throat. Could someone truly be coming to help her? Or was this another trick of the desert, another cruel mirage designed to mock her hope? She dared not move, afraid that any sudden motion might anger the elders or alert them to her wavering composure. Her fingers dug deeper into the sand, anchoring herself. While her eyes never left the approaching figure, the man drew nearer, and she noticed the way he observed the village with a careful, almost protective vigilance. His dark eyes scanned the square, noting the positions of the elders, the crowd's movements, the patterns of the sun reflecting off the sand. There was a precision to him, a quiet awareness that spoke of a life honed in survival and hardship. This was no ordinary traveler. This was someone who understood the desert in a way Ayana could only dream of. As he reached the edge of the village, the crowd began to murmur. They glanced at him with suspicion, but he made no move to draw their attention. His focus was on Ayana. Kneeling beside her, he assessed the situation quickly. The heat, the depth of the sand, the tension in her body. Then, with careful hands, he began to dig around her, not with haste, but with deliberate care that minimized pain. Each movement of his strong fingers was measured, precise, and infused with a kind of reverent respect that startled her. "Stay calm," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying just enough warmth to reach her through the fear that had tightened its grip around her chest. "I will get you out. You are not meant to be buried here." Ayana's eyes filled with tears, not just from relief, but from the sudden, overwhelming sense of being seen, of being valued. For so long, the villagers' eyes had weighed her down with judgment and scorn. But now, in the gaze of this stranger, she felt a glimmer of trust, a possibility that someone could see her worth beyond the cruel verdict of tradition. The crowd stirred nervously, sensing something shifting. The warrior worked with a calm urgency, lifting the sand from her shoulders, unfastening her hair matted with grit, and guiding her into a sitting position. Each moment was a mix of tension and awe. Ayana felt the desert wind on her exposed skin, sharp and hot, but also liberating, carrying away a part of the shame that had clung to her for years. Finally, he helped her to her feet. She was unsteady, her legs trembling beneath her, but the warrior's presence was steadying. He offered no explanations for who he was or why he had come. Such things could wait. What mattered was the simple, undeniable truth. She was free, rescued from the suffocating grasp of sand and cruelty. Ayana looked around at the villagers, their faces a mix of anger, fear, and disbelief, and then back at the warrior who had saved her. In that moment, she realized that the desert was no longer just a place of punishment and despair. It could also be a place of salvation, a vast and wild expanse where courage and kindness could carve a path through even the harshest heat. The warrior extended his hand to her, steady and unwavering, and she took it, feeling the first real surge of hope she had known in years. Together, they stepped away from the village square, leaving the sand and its cruel judgment behind. The desert stretched before them like an endless ocean of gold and heat. Each dune rose and fell like waves, their peaks shimmering in the blazing sunlight. Ayana stumbled at first, her legs weak from being trapped in the sand for hours, but the warrior's steady hand on her elbow kept her upright. "Lean on me if you need to," he said, his voice calm, carrying a quiet authority that contrasted sharply with the chaos she had just escaped. "The desert is unforgiving, but if we move carefully, we will find safety." Her chest heaved with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. She dared to look at him now, really look the sharp lines of his face, the dark intensity in his eyes, the way he moved as if he were born to this landscape. He was an Apache warrior, she realized, attuned to the rhythms of the desert, to the whispers of the wind and the footprints in the sand. Every step he took seemed deliberate, guided by instinct honed over years of surviving this harsh world. They began walking, slowly at first, careful not to draw attention from the villagers who might still pursue them. The heat of the sun pressed down relentlessly, and the sand shifted beneath their feet, threatening to pull them down with each step. Ayana's arms ached from holding herself steady, and her throat burned from thirst. But the warrior's presence was a balm, a grounding force that reminded her she was no longer alone. As they moved further from the village, the wind began to rise, carrying sand in sharp gusts that stung her skin. He pulled a cloth from his pack, wrapping it around her face to shield her from the biting grains. She looked up at him through narrowed eyes, and for the first time a faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. He did not respond with words. Instead, he offered her a reassuring nod and a firm grip on her shoulder. In the desert, he seemed to say, actions spoke louder than promises. She sensed that he understood her pain, her fear, without needing to hear it articulated. And in that unspoken understanding, a fragile bond began to form. The desert itself seemed to test them. Dunes rose sharply, forcing them to climb with careful precision. The sun, unrelenting, turned the sand beneath their feet into a furnace. Occasionally, the distant cry of a hawk pierced the air, a reminder of the vast emptiness around them. Every shadow offered both relief and uncertainty, every gust of wind a warning that nature here was as merciless as the humans they had left behind. Yet amid the struggle, there were moments of quiet connection. As they rested briefly in the shade of a rock formation, Ayana told him her name, and for the first time, a part of her opened up. I've been blamed for things I cannot change," she said softly, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "They think I'm cursed because I cannot give them a child." He listened without interrupting, the corners of his mouth set in a thoughtful line. Then he placed a steady hand over hers. "The desert teaches harsh lessons," he said slowly, "but it also teaches truth. You are not cursed. You are strong, and your worth is not defined by what others demand of you." The words struck her like water in the desert heat, soothing a part of her that had gone dry from years of judgment and isolation. She felt her chest lighten, a small ember of hope igniting where despair had settled. For the first time in what felt like forever, she dared to believe that survival was possible, not just physically, but emotionally. As they continued their journey, the sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in fiery shades of orange and red. The desert seemed both terrifying and breathtakingly beautiful, a vast expanse where danger and freedom coexisted. With each step, Ayana felt the weight of the village's cruelty receding, replaced by something she had thought impossible: trust, safety, and the quiet beginnings of courage. And at her side, the Apache warrior moved with unwavering purpose, a living promise that even in the harshest places, mercy, strength, and protection could exist. The sun had begun its slow descent, spilling molten gold across the desert horizon, when the warrior finally led Ayana to a hidden oasis. The sight took her breath away. A small, shimmering pool of water surrounded by palms and flowering shrubs, a secret world tucked away from the harshness of sand and sun. The air here was cooler, scented with the faint sweetness of blossoms and damp earth, a stark contrast to the arid, punishing landscape they had crossed. Ayana sank to the ground beside the pool, the soft grass and cool earth beneath her legs a revelation. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to relax. The warrior knelt beside her, untying her wraps and offering her water from a leather pouch. Each sip was a balm. Quenching more than thirst, it washed away fragments of fear, despair, and the suffocating shame the village had buried her under. She gazed into the pool, watching the reflection of the fiery sky ripple across the water's surface. For so long she had believed she was defined by what she could not give, by her infertility, by her inability to meet the demands of a tradition-bound village. But here, in this hidden oasis, that judgment seemed meaningless. The desert had tested her, and she had endured. She had survived. The warriors studied her quietly, allowing her the space to process her emotions. Then he spoke, his voice calm and steady, carrying the weight of lived experience. "The desert is harsh," he said, "but it does not lie. It reveals truth. You have endured what many would not survive. That is your strength. That is who you are." Tears sprang to her eyes. The rawness of her past pain, the humiliation, the fear, the isolation felt heavier now that it could finally be released. I always thought I was weak," she admitted, voice trembling. "That everyone was right about me. That I didn't matter." He reached out, resting a hand gently on hers. "Your worth was never in what the village demanded. It is in your courage, your resilience, the life you carry within yourself even when others cannot see it. You are more than their fear and superstition." Ayanna swallowed hard, feeling a warmth spread through her chest, a fragile but undeniable sense of hope. She realized that survival was not just about escaping physical danger, it was about reclaiming the self that had been suffocated by judgment and cruelty. Here, in this oasis, she began to heal, piece by piece, in the quiet, protective presence of the warrior who had risked himself to save her. They remained there long after the sun had slipped behind the dunes, the stars beginning to pierce the deep indigo sky. Around the pool, the desert seemed to breathe a different rhythm, gentle, forgiving, and alive. Ayanna spoke of her past, of the pain and fear she had carried, and the warrior listened, never interrupting, never judging. In return, he shared stories of the desert, the ways it shaped life, tested courage, and revealed character. She felt a kinship forming, a bond forged not by words alone, but by shared endurance and the quiet intimacy of survival. As night fell, the oasis glowed softly under the moonlight, reflecting Ayanna's newfound sense of clarity. She understood, for the first time, that her journey was not just about fleeing the village or escaping cruelty. It was about discovering her own strength, about learning that hope could exist even in the harshest landscapes, and that someone extraordinary could see her true worth when the world refused to. The desert night enveloped them, vast and mysterious, but no longer frightening. In its silence, Ayanna felt the stirrings of a life reborn, fragile yet resilient, like the oasis itself, a sanctuary amid the endless dunes, a testament that even in the harshest trials, beauty and healing could flourish. The dawn broke over the desert, painting the dunes in pale gold and soft pink, yet the serenity of the oasis was a fragile illusion. Word of Ayanna's escape had reached the village, carried by whispers of fear and anger that traveled faster than the desert wind. A group of villagers, led by the stern elders, had set out to retrieve her, determined to drag her back and enforce their cruel judgment. Ayanna stirred as the first light touched her face. The warrior was already alert, scanning the horizon with a practiced eye. "They are coming," he said quietly, his tone calm but sharp, betraying none of the tension that gripped her heart. Fear rose like a tide in her chest, but it was accompanied by something new, a quiet resolve that had taken root during the long night of healing. She would not return. She would not let the village's cruelty define her any longer. The first figures appeared over the dunes, small dark shapes growing steadily larger. The villagers shouted commands, their voices sharp against the desert stillness. But the warrior stood firm, moving in front of Ayanna as a shield, his stance both protective and commanding. "They cannot take you," he said. "Not now, not ever. You are stronger than their fear. Stronger than their rules, the villagers arrived at the edge of the oasis, stopping as if struck by an unseen force. The oasis seemed almost sacred, a natural boundary that their anger could not cross. Ayanna stepped forward, her bare feet sinking slightly into the soft sand at the water's edge. For the first time, she looked at them not with fear, but with defiance. "I am not yours to control," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the small clearing. "I am not cursed, and I will not return to a place that sees me as less than human. Your judgment ends here." The elders faltered, taken aback by the strength in her words. Some villagers looked uncertain, torn between tradition and the undeniable courage of the woman before them. The warrior's hand rested lightly on Ayanna's shoulder, a reminder that she was not alone. One elder stepped forward, shaking with anger. "You defy the ways of your people. You dishonor the tribe." Ayanna held her gaze, her voice firm. "I honor life itself. I honor the strength I have found in myself. That is worth more than fear and superstition." A tense silence fell over the oasis. The desert wind carried the echoes of their confrontation across the dunes. Slowly, some villagers began to step back, uncertainty replacing anger. Others, still bound by rigid tradition, looked away. Unable to face the undeniable truth, she was no longer powerless. The warrior remained calm, but his eyes never left the group, ready to defend her if needed. Yet it was not brute strength alone that ensured their safety, it was Ayanna's courage. Her refusal to shrink under their judgment, her emergence as someone who had reclaimed her own story. Finally, the villagers began to retreat, grumbling among themselves, defeated not by battle, but by the sheer force of Ayanna's resolve. She exhaled, feeling a weight lift from her chest. The desert around her seemed to hum with approval, the sun glinting off the water of the oasis as if celebrating her victory. Ayanna turned to the warrior, gratitude and awe filling her eyes. I could not have done this without you," she said softly. He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "You did this. I only showed you the path. The strength was always yours." For the first time, Ayanna felt a profound sense of empowerment. She had faced the cruelty of her own people and emerged not broken, but whole. The desert, once a symbol of fear and punishment, had become a place of transformation, a testament to endurance, courage, and the discovery of self-worth. And as they walked together away from the oasis, leaving the defeated village behind, Ayanna knew that her life was no longer dictated by the judgments of others. She was free, not just in body, but in spirit, ready to step into a world defined by her own strength and choices. The desert stretched endlessly before them, vast and untamed, yet somehow less intimidating now. The village lay far behind, a fading memory of fear, judgment, and cruelty. Ayanna walked beside the warrior, her steps lighter, her chest unburdened, her spirit beginning to embrace the freedom she had fought so hard to claim. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dunes, and the air was cooler now, carrying the faint scent of distant vegetation. With every step, the desert transformed from a symbol of punishment into a landscape of possibility, a place where courage and resilience could carve a path through even the harshest terrain. Ayanna spoke softly, her voice tinged with wonder. "I never imagined the desert could be so alive, so beautiful." The warrior glanced at her, a faint smile softening his stern features. "The desert mirrors life," he said. "It can be harsh, unforgiving, but it also offers freedom, clarity, and strength. It tests you, yes, but it also reveals who you truly are." She nodded, understanding now in a way she never could have while trapped by the village's cruelty. For years, she had been buried under the weight of expectation and superstition. Now, she was no longer defined by what she could not give, but by the courage she had discovered within herself. As they journeyed, the desert's silence became their companion, its vastness a reminder of the endless possibilities ahead. They spoke of simple things at first: water, stars, the wind, and then, gradually, of hopes, dreams, and fears that had long been buried. In the warrior's presence, Ayanna felt safe enough to speak her truth, and in doing so, she found a sense of connection she had never known before. They came upon a ridge overlooking a wide valley, where the first hints of green signaled life beyond the dunes. Ayanna paused, taking in the sight, the promise of a world that could hold more than judgment and cruelty. Her heart swelled with a quiet exhilaration. "We could live there," she said, almost to herself. "Somewhere no one knows us, where the past cannot reach us." The warrior nodded. "Yes, a life of your choosing, built on courage, respect, and freedom." For the first time, Ayanna allowed herself to imagine a future that was not dictated by others, a life where she could be whole, valued, and loved not for what she produced but for who she was. The desert had tested her, shaped her, and ultimately freed her. But now the horizon promised something beyond survival. Possibility. As they descended toward the valley, the warrior extended his hand to her. She took it without hesitation, feeling the strength and reassurance it offered. Together, they walked into the unknown, leaving behind the village, the sand, and the judgment that had once sought to define her. The desert, once a place of punishment, now felt like a guardian, guiding them toward a new life. With every step, Ayanna's confidence grew, her spirit strengthened by the trials she had endured. She realized that true freedom was not just the absence of danger, but the presence of choice, the ability to define oneself, and the courage to move forward despite fear. And as the sun set behind them, painting the sky with shades of gold and crimson, Ayanna smiled, a real, unburdened smile. She had been buried, condemned, and left to despair. Yet here she was, walking toward life with her own hands on the reins, with a warrior at her side who had shown her that courage, compassion, and resilience could prevail even in the harshest of deserts. The journey was far from over, but Ayanna felt it in her bones. She was no longer a victim of the past. She was the author of her own story, stepping boldly into a horizon where hope, freedom, and love awaited. The sun had fully dipped below the horizon, leaving the desert bathed in a soft twilight glow. The dunes, once symbols of judgment and suffocating punishment, now rolled like gentle waves of possibility. The air was cooler, scented faintly with desert sage and distant blooms, carrying a promise that life could be kinder than the world she had left behind. Ayanna walked beside the warrior, their steps synchronized, silent in the understanding that no words could fully capture. Every grain of sand beneath their feet felt different now, soft, alive, and welcoming. She realized that the desert had been both her prison and her teacher. It had tested her courage, revealed her resilience, and ultimately freed her in ways she had never imagined. They reached the crest of a dune overlooking a wide, fertile valley. In the distance, a river shimmered like silver under the moonlight, and clusters of green hinted at life untouched by the rigid cruelty of her village. Ayanna paused, taking in the view. The vast horizon before her symbolized something she had longed for but never dared to hope for: freedom. Not just from the village, but from the fear and self-doubt that had haunted her heart for so long. Warrior stepped closer and gently rested a hand on her shoulder. "This is your world now," he said softly. "The past cannot touch you here. You are free to live, to choose, to love, and to be who you were always meant to be." Ayanna looked up at him, her eyes reflecting both gratitude and a newfound determination. "I never thought I'd feel whole again," she admitted. "But now, I feel like the desert has given me back myself," he smiled, a quiet warmth lighting his features. "You never lost it," he said. "You only needed to survive long enough to see it for yourself." A gentle wind swept across the dunes, lifting her hair and carrying away the remnants of fear and shame. In that moment, she understood that her worth had never been tied to what the villagers demanded of her. Her strength, her spirit, and her capacity to endure had always been enough. And now, with the warrior at her side, she knew she had not only survived, but thrived. They stood together, side by side, watching the moon rise over the valley, the stars emerging like distant guardians. Ayanna felt the quiet power of the desert around them, not as a force of punishment, but as a witness to her courage, a protector of her freedom. The bond she shared with the warrior was more than gratitude. It was a connection forged in trials, respect, and shared survival. "I don't know what the future holds," she whispered, "but I know I'm ready to face it. With hope. With strength. With you." The warrior reached for her hand again, holding it firmly, a silent promise of companionship and protection. "Then we face it together," he said, and as they began to walk down the dunes toward the valley below, the desert behind them seemed to sigh, releasing its burden and embracing their triumph. Each step forward was a step into a life reclaimed, a life defined not by fear, not by cruelty, but by resilience, courage, and love. Ayanna had been buried, judged, and condemned, yet she had emerged stronger than ever, guided by the wisdom and protection of the warrior who had seen her worth. The desert, once a place of punishment, had become a place of rebirth. And beneath the vast, starry sky, she finally understood the deepest truth of all. She was free to be herself. And in that freedom, she had found home, hope, and the beginning of a new life. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, and for the first time, Ayanna walked into it without fear, only with the unshakable certainty that the story of her life was hers to write, and the sands of the desert would bear witness to her courage forever.